Hello to the esteemed participants in this Gtac Winter School. It's a great pleasure for me to host this final session. There's been so much rich content about the impact of coronavirus on our economic policy and on social policy. And I hope that I have an esteemed panel here that I hope will in their conversation unpack some of the big issues involved here. So the topic of the discussion, what we want to discuss now, is the recovery. We remain in a state of partial lockdown, and so I suppose the recovery will only really be able to get going and build momentum once we are all vaccinated, perhaps. But still, as the last panel set out, now is the time to start thinking about the future. And the future we want to think about in this panel is the next 6 to 18 months, or 18 to 24 months, it might be a better framing. I have an esteemed panel. I have Nomvuyo Guma, who is a senior official at National Treasury, working on economic policy, and has been a dedicated public servant there for many years. I have Professor Stephen Friedman, who I'm sure all of you have come across. He teaches political science at the University of Johannesburg, but is a public intellectual of great note. That is always able to give us a measured contribution, which takes account of the very deep contradictions that are in South African society. Boitumelo Mashilo heads the unit within Gtac that is responsible for appraising national capital projects. So when various departments come with ideas about how to spend money on capital, Boitumelo and his team do a technical evaluation of those proposals and make recommendations about how we should go forward. And finally, Professor Imran Valudia, probably the most difficult job he has is he's my boss. But he's also has other minor responsibilities, such as being Dean of Commerce Law and Management at the University of Witwatersrand, and is also a member of the Presidential Economic Advisory Commission or Committee, if I'm not mistaken. So thank you to all of my guests. The way we thought we would do this session is, rather than having a series of presentations, I've asked Nomvuyo to give us a brief overview of what is what is the bottom line with respect to the economic recovery and reconstruction program that has been tabled by government, and what are some of the issues that we will be having in implementing that program. And I want to highlight the words recovery on the one hand and reconstruction on the other, because I think the inclusion of those two words in that plan says something, which I'll come back to later. But let's go now to Nomvuyo and ask you to give us your summary of the program.
Thanks, Michael, and good afternoon to all the attendees, and thank you for that very warm welcome. The emojis are making me smile here. So in terms of the ERRP, this was really government's response to COVID. We know that the South African economy entered the COVID era on very shaky ground. We'd experienced a long-term cyclical downturn in our growth rate. We already had record high levels of unemployment, and we were battling against the energy constraint imposed by Eskom's inability to generate enough energy. So I think if you think back to the beginning of the year, in terms of our budget forecast, we only expected the economy to grow by about 0.9% in 2020 anyway. And of course, for an emerging market, developing economy like ours, we all know that it needs to be closer to 6 or even above just to make a dent on our unemployment rate. So of course, 0.9 is just nowhere near where it needed to be. And this was pre-COVID. In the event COVID happened, and we know that the actual outcome was a contraction of about 7.2% of GDP. Since then, even though some quarters have seen growth being somewhat higher than we would have anticipated, we're still in a situation where we'll only get back to 2019 levels in terms of GDP at our current estimate around 2023, 24. So that, I think sometimes when you hear that the economy contracted by 7.2%, it doesn't quite put in perspective how big a step back that really was for us. So after we had to respond with a supplementary budget and some kind of fiscal response to COVID, but then of course we really had to focus our minds on how we were going to not just claw back the ground that we lost to the pandemic, but then also put South Africa on a surer and faster growth trajectory after that. And so this involved government coming together with social partners like labor and civil society and business to put our heads together and figure out how we were going to get out of this quagmire. Now, of course, up till then, because we'd been stuck on this low growth trajectory for so long, there've been lots of conversations, lots of discussion, lots of seminars like this on how to actually get South Africa out of this situation, what some of the ideas were, some diagnostics for how we found ourselves in the situation to begin with. And so it really wasn't an attempt to reinvent the wheel. It was an attempt to bring all of these threads together and come up with a cohesive and comprehensive plan to boost South Africa's growth trajectory. Obviously, also buoyed by the fact that we had a new administration who have committed to getting our growth back on track. So that's in a nutshell what the kind of genesis of the ERRP. In terms of the actual structure of the plan, it was based on 5 pillars. The first, to your point about reconstruction and redevelopment, the first was on infrastructure development. So we know that in terms of stimulating growth, infrastructure investment is one of the best things that you can do. The spin-offs are incredible, and the multipliers help to boost growth over the long term as well and create a stable platform for growth, unlike if you were trying to just spur consumption, for instance. So that was the first pillar of the plan. There is a infrastructure office that's based in the presidency that has a long-term pipeline of projects. So we're talking almost R1 trillion in terms of planned investment that should be coming through in terms of what we modeled for the plan. So that was pillar 1. Pillar 2 was tackling the energy constraint. So this one also had some combination of investment in energy, but also recognized some of the steps that Eskom was taking to improve its generation capacity. Pillar number 3 was around public employment initiatives, recognizing the devastating effect that COVID had on employment. This was the Presidential Youth Employment Initiative. I think it had a budgeted allocation of in excess of 11 billion, and the aim was to create over 600,000 work opportunities to get people back on their feet and provide some short-term stimulus for the economy as well. Then we also included the industrial plans. These are being rolled out by the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition. So these are master plans, and they involve partnerships between government and the private sector, some support offered on the part of business, on the part of government, but then complemented by investment commitments from industry. About 15 of those at various stages of development, and these also included as part of the plan. And then the 5th one was a whole encompassing set of initiatives that we grouped under the heading enabling conditions. Now, this really was about tackling the business environment and creating an environment that is conducive for continued and greater investment. So this included things like improving licensing conditions, for instance. This was about in the water sector trying to reduce the time that it takes to get a water license, same in the mining sector. Slashing regulatory barriers, giving support to small businesses, a whole lot of initiatives were grouped under the heading. They're just a general nod to the fact that one needs to create an environment that's conducive for business, so that whatever stimulus government does try and inject into the economy then actually spurs the investment that you want to kick off this higher growth trajectory. So those were the 5 pillars of the plan. I'm not going to go too much into the challenges around them, because I imagine that the rest of the panel is going to spend much time on that. I will just focus on the fact that the plan attracted its fair amount of criticism. One of the big ones was the lack of prioritization of the plan, and the fact that it did seem to appear to people as some sort of mixed soup of interventions, hastily cobbled together, I think, was a comment that we received. So it certainly wasn't hastily cobbled together. I think one could go around in circles around the prioritization. Certainly there are some aspects that maybe one wouldn't put into a reconstruction and recovery plan. There was some criticism that some of them are just normal processes of government that we should be doing anyway, not trying to marshal into this plan and make it seem perhaps more effective or better than it would be otherwise. But I do think that one would then have to look at the intention behind it, which really was to try and repair what was at the time a very fractured relationship between business and government. And so that really wasn't the juncture in my own mind to be setting up the kinds of confrontations over things that should or shouldn't be in the plan. I think there's a very clear way forward in the way that government is trying to implement the plan. So, for instance, you had Operation Vulindlela being one of the initiatives that came out of there to say, well, all of the things that this plan seeks to achieve and we need to implement, why don't we focus on the biggest structural constraints and fast track those? So I think there is a recognition that all of these things are urgent and important, but in the way that we've chosen to implement them, we have actually applied a prioritization process to that. So I'm going to leave that there, Michael, and we can circle back.
So before I leave you alone, Nomvuyo, let me pose this question to you. Of these 5 pillars, if you had to choose only one, which one would you choose?
Can I phone a friend?
Well, maybe we can ask the audience. Maybe that's a more appropriate response in this context.
No, I would choose the enabling conditions one. Based on the modeling outcomes, we actually found that this had the biggest bang for buck. And I think that's because enabling conditions cut across all sectors. So you get greater productivity gains across the economy than if you were to just look, for instance, at some of the sectoral initiatives that we modeled as well.
So those enabling that pillar, would I be right to describe it as kind of reform to regulation that lowers the cost of doing business? That's really
Yes.
where you would put your eggs in that basket if you were forced to put them all in one.
Yes, and it actually does contain some of the renewable energy, like the raising of the licensing threshold, for instance. So some of those thoughts that relate to lifting the energy constraint also appear in that category.
Okay, thank you. Boitumelo, so a big element in this recovery is going to be public sector infrastructure. I wonder if you could give us a sense of how is the public, so Nomvuyo says there's $1 trillion planned. How much of that are we going to see in the next year or two? And what are the big things that we're going to see that is going to change the face of South Africa, or is the plan facing challenges or difficulties? What do you say?
Thanks, Michael, for the question, and good day to everyone. And just a job well done to Gtac for organizing this winter school. Maybe before I start talking about what are some of the things that we will be seeing over the next year or two, if you were to ask me the question that you just asked Nomvuyo, which priority would be number one for you? For me, it would be the infrastructure delivery, not because I am in that space. And I think this is important because on top of the priority list in the recovery plan was really this drive towards the acceleration of delivery of infrastructure. And this was also something that was supported by the budget, wherein capital spending was reported to be the fastest growing component of non-interest spending. And the question is why? Well, in some people's mind. And the answer for me is quite simple, going back again to the issue of enablers. Infrastructure is a key enabler that facilitates primary economic activities, the transportation of goods and services, as well as the provision of access to public services such as school and health. But also infrastructure plays a crucial role in promoting the investment-led growth and also contributes to enhancing the productivity and competitiveness of business. There was an interesting study that was done by the Global Infrastructure Hub, which showed that infrastructure spending has, on average, a fiscal multiplier, I think, in the region of 1.5 units, while other forms of government spending average about 1 unit. And this is why we keep seeing government support infrastructure investment and seeking ways to boost confidence that may result in the crowding in of private sector investments, in addition to the expertise and capital that is needed to support the public infrastructure program. And what I think is important in this context is to understand that when we are looking at infrastructure investments or gross capital fixed formation, we have, or government has the responsibility on the one side to actually inspire confidence to the private sector so that they themselves can invest in infrastructure, building malls and building farms, factories, and so on and so forth. Because if you look at the GFCF levels, you will see that the private sector spends more funds than we do as government. So that's just on the one side, the issue of boosting confidence and ensuring that there is a crowding in effect. On the other side, there's the public infrastructure program, which is what we focus on. And I think maybe what I would say on this one is to simply say that it is not normal to have rolling electricity blackouts. It's not normal to be spending a considerable amount of time in traffic.
Where I'm sitting, Boitumelo, it's very normal. It's every week or every 2 weeks, so it's very normal.
I'm coming to that. To be buying data at exorbitant costs, or for your internet to keep buffering when you are in meetings or you are in class, not to have proper sanitation, to travel long distances to access public services, and the list goes on and on and on. And this is why government continues to prioritize investment. It needs to address the supply side constraints. It needs to reverse the historic pattern of underinvestment, but it also needs to ensure that it improves social welfare. Without these things, it will be very difficult to grow the economy, let alone talking about issues of inclusivity or sustainability. So, that's more or less, I think, what the government is trying to do. I know that your question was specifically about the private sector or attracting private sector investment, but I'll come back to that and talk a little bit about the infrastructure fund, why that was created, talk about the fact that we are reviewing the PPP framework and legislation. We are talking about amending regulation 28 of the Pension Fund Act. And those are some of the things that I think government is doing to ensure that at the end of the day, there is sufficiency on the part of, one, crowding in the investments from the private sector, but two, in order for it to undertake the necessary investment that it needs to.
Thank you, sir. So if we listen to Boitumelo, he speaks about both the short-term multiplier impacts of public investment as well, and I think Nomvuyo also referred to this, the fact that in addition to those demand side effects, it has a supply side effect of improving the platform on which the economy is growing. So if I think of the economy as a car, maybe your ufaga mafuta in the car to speed it up, that's the demand side effect. But also you're actually taking the car for service, or you're upgrading the state of the car itself. But Boitumelo says, in order for it to have really sustained long-term impacts, it must crowd in private sector investment. Now, I think right now in South Africa, we face a big challenge, because when the coronavirus hit us, many people felt, and not only in South Africa, but across the world, this is an opportunity to begin again, to rethink and reimagine what kind of society and economy we can have. And it may be that this moment that we have now is a moment where we can introduce fundamental changes in the structure of society and our economy. So these have, for instance, coalesced recently, perhaps around the idea of a basic income grant as one suggestion that has emerged strongly. But there are many others, and there are many agendas that seek transformation. The challenge might be that if we want to crowd in private sector investment, these types of things which are disruptive of existing interests, particularly in the private sector, may militate against that kind of recovery and increase in demand. So we have a recovery and reconstruction program. And I think in a sense, the recovery is about putting the petrol in the system, getting the juices moving, getting the private investment, getting the public investment. And the reconstruction is about reforming our society. So I wanted to put it to my panel. Is this a false trade-off that I'm posing between transformation on the one hand and growth on the other hand? Or is it one that is real? And if it is real, which one is the priority at this moment? Imran, just because you're moving a little bit, whereas others are keeping very still.
So I think the way that you framed it, Michael, is a bit of a false kind of trade-off. So I would very strongly support the kind of idea that what we need is a new growth trajectory. So for me, the way out of the conundrum that we're in is only possible with a new trajectory of growth. But I would say that that growth process has to be fundamentally different from the types of growth that we've had kind of up to date. And for me, that's why I think it's a bit of a false trade-off. So the kind of growth has to be one that kind of creates opportunities for new kind of entry into the mainstream of the economy, and one that is not going to kind of simply create a growth process that is very much only in the interests of those who benefit currently from growth. So it has to be a fundamentally different form of a growth process. So I think I'm sure Boitumelo didn't mean this, but it's kind of interesting that when he was talking about the infrastructure program, and I'd be a strong supporter that growth process has to be kind of infrastructure led. He mentioned malls. Now, for me, that's what we need is a growth process that is not going to give us new malls, but a growth process where public investment is going to kind of generate a growth process that is going to bring into that growth process a whole host of people that are currently marginalized from the mainstream of the economy. I'm thinking here about people about creating new opportunities for people in kind of in the informal economy, creating new opportunities for women to kind of enter the economy, but also creating new kind of opportunities for the kind of upper middle class political kind of interest to kind of have a new accumulation process. I think what the last maybe 2 years has kind of has made clear is that if the only accumulation process that we have is one that is based on kind of people looting, then people are going to loot, and for me that's why it's imperative that we have growth. But I would say it's got to be a fundamentally different type of growth that would kind of really address the kind of inequalities that we have. I think if you put it in the way that you have, where the kind of choice is to just create a growth process that is going to benefit those who can already benefit a large amount, I think we can only recreating the kind of conditions, or making much worse the conditions that are kind of holding us back in any event.
So would you say, Imran, that it doesn't sound quite right, but exclusive growth, in other words, the pattern of growth that we had before, growth that excludes people, is worse than no growth at all?
Well, that's putting it strongly. I mean, so I think in the long term, I would answer that is yes. That we've got to use this opportunity to kind of create the conditions for a sustainable economy, and that one that is socially sustainable. Kind of creating a growth process that is only that is the exclusive one that you've mentioned is not going to. We're not going to go, I don't think, from exclusive growth to inclusive growth. And I think these kind of sequencing issues are really are kind of really important. There's an economic constraint, but there's also the constraints that we face on kind of some of the key politics of the country, and you have to bring those forces together to be able to generate growth that is kind of truly inclusive.
Well, thank you so much for a brilliant segue into Professor Stephen Friedman. And I'll invite him to comment on anything, but you're saying, can the political forces that are constructing this idea of reconstruction and reform, are they able to deliver this inclusive growth process going forward, do you think, Prof?
Well, I'm not sure that anybody's proposing an inclusive growth process. Certainly the National Treasury isn't. And I'm afraid that the response from the other side that you've been talking about is not moving us, substantially beyond the things we used to talk about 20 years ago. I agree with a lot of what Imran has said, but I would have answered your question about growth a bit differently. And I would have said that the real question to me is, can we have sustainable growth? And I don't mean socially sustainable. I mean growth which continues at a high level if we don't address the inclusion issue. And my answer would be no. So it's the whole sequencing question is a false question, because first of all, and I think it's very important to say that at a winter school for young economists who hopefully may be considering careers in the public sector, it's based first of all on a belief that people in policy-making positions can manipulate reality in a way which they simply can't. So in other words, you have these long discussions about what is the best thing we should do, and you fail to consider the fact that we are not the only actors on the stage, because there are a whole lot of other folks out there who see the world in a very different way and who may well have the capacity to make sure that you can't do what it is that you want to do. And as long as that is a reality, then this notion that we can produce growth because clever people have done their sums and come up with clever solutions is not a realistic proposition. Secondly, I think that, and having read the Treasury documents and listened to what Nomvuyo Mbutumelov has to say, I think part of the problem is that the approach at the moment is based on a view of what economic growth is and in what way it's achievable, which is highly questionable. And it's questionable in two ways. First of all, I find it very interesting that in all the presentations, we have claims about what it would take to crowd in private investment and claims about what it would take to get the private sector to invest, none of which, to the best of my knowledge, is based on very credible evidence of how investment decisions are made and how they're likely to be influenced. We tend to have this very mechanistic view of investment decisions taken out of textbooks. Investment decisions are made by people. And unless you understand how those people operate and what is motivating them, you're not going to get right what makes them invest. It is not axiomatic in a society with our social and political divisions that if you do all these wonderful things, it will produce the investment that you're seeking. Because besides the political question that I mentioned earlier, which is that all this confidence you try to build up by telling business people that actually, no, there's no poverty and inequality problem in this country, or certainly not one that we're going to take seriously. You can get away from it for a while. You can do it in the way that it's been done over the last couple of months, which is simply to be able to get policy wins because there's no alternative. So you can persuade the Minister of Energy that he's being unreasonable about private provision because there just is an alternative if we want power. You can persuade the Minister of Public Enterprises that SAA has to be privatized because there isn't the money. You can do that to a certain extent. But then at some point, it's going to get knocked out of the box. It's going to be knocked out of the box by the folks at social development who want to nationalize things, or it will be knocked out of the box by another public dispute about national health insurance or any other list of issues that I could name. So sorry, folks at Treasury, you don't rule the world. You aren't entirely in control, and you have to take into account the rest of the society. Given these realities, my own position spelled out in a book I just published, etc., which I've been yammering on for years, is that there is no social and economic actor in this society which can impose solutions on everybody else. Nobody. And logically, if you are in a reality in which that is the case, then all the social actors, whether we're talking about planners at Treasury or business strategists who at the moment seem to have entirely bought the idea of their own infallibility, that you have to listen to the other guys and that you have to start bargaining with the other guys and that you have to start trading off with the other guys. Because if you don't do that, you're going to continue to produce academically elegant solutions, which are going to crumble when they are confronted with social reality.
Prof, thank you very much. When you started, you mentioned in passing the debates of 25 years ago that we seem to be going back to somehow. And I suppose what came into my mind when you said that was, as we were entering into the period of democracy, there was this debate about, should we be at the simplest level, should we be striving for growth? Should that be our primary concern, or should redistribution be our primary concern? And maybe redistribution is a narrow definition of the issue, because it tends to focus on income transfers. But maybe would you say that we have to find a path to transformation? And that is, and until we find a negotiated path to transformation, we are unlikely to sustain a process of growth. Would that be yeah?
Yeah, more or less, except I wouldn't use the word transformation. I'd use the word inclusion. And the advantage of inclusion is that it's a nice, simple word which we can actually define. And we can look at, what the problem really is, and we can start talking about solutions. The problem with these terms like transformation is that they mean whatever the speaker wants it to mean. And I think we know, it's been spelled out in policy documents. It's spelled out in a much discussed talk by a deputy MD of the IMF a few years ago. The basic reality is that 27 years into democracy, probably, and this is off the top of my head, 70% of South Africa can't get in on the formal economic action. And until we change that, we will not have sustainable growth. I mean, you don't need me to tell you that if you're only using the energies and abilities and resources of 30% of the population, that you're going to have very severe limits on growth. So we need to talk about inclusion. And some of the things which are in official documents about inclusion are very helpful up to a point. The material in the Treasury document about barriers to entry is very important. But my problem with it is that we're so stuck in the formal actors and to be precise at the moment in what business has to say, because Labour, quite frankly, doesn't have terribly much to say at the moment, and neither do the social movements, that we miss the reality in which 70% of the population are living. So when you have a Treasury document which talks about inclusion, they talk about Capitec and fruit and veg city, which are interesting examples of how you make the economy more competitive. But they don't address the point about how a young man in Tembisa who has energy and ideas and wants to contribute to the formal economy actually gets into it. And all I'm saying is that until we start talking about those issues, then there are going to be very, very severe constraints on growth.
So maybe, as I move back to Nomvuyo, maybe the idea here, I mean, we usually talk about inclusive growth, and that suggests I mean, in terms of English grammar, it's like the verb is growth, and then there's an adjective that it must be, the growth must be inclusive. But maybe we should be talking about inclusion that is compatible with growth. So forms of inclusion that lead to growth rather than forms of growth that lead to inclusion, maybe. So, I thought, I know one of Imran Valudia's many jobs is on the Competition Commission. And they recently had an initiative around mechanics and car servicing and breaking up the monopoly around the servicing of cars. And that strikes me as an example of something that is that would create a more inclusionary economy, but would also increase productivity, lower costs for consumers and the like, break up a monopoly. So should we be looking, should we primarily be asking, how do we include people in a way that is growth enhancing, rather than how do we grow the economy in a way that is that leads to inclusion. Maybe it's again a false dichotomy. Before you answer, you can also I don't know if you've taken note of the interesting discussion in the conversation. I think for all of the panelists, Boitumelo as well, there's a number of questions that are posed to you there, and also Imran, which I'll come back to you later. But Nomvuyo, what are your thoughts about the discussion so far?
So I think I find it very interesting, actually, how the Treasury and Treasury officials are perceived. I think there's this sense where we people imagine that we are neoliberals and no one could be prouder, you know, that high school chant. And we chant it every morning, and we come into the office and we continue to chant it. And we
when I was there, we were doing that. What were you talking about? And we were doing
maybe the budget office was, but we certainly
we didn't invite you there, yeah.
No, exactly. But here on the 20th floor in economic policy, we always refer to evidence-based policy making. So it's not a question of picking the ideas that you like. It's a question of looking at the theory, looking at real-world examples, and then trying to, from there, understand whether these things would apply to South Africa or not. And I mean, I don't know, there's this increasing kind of sense in which we need to be innovative and different and go out there. I mean, I don't know. Do you go to your bank and you want people to be creative with your money? I certainly don't. I want good old-fashioned principles of accounting and prudent money management to apply. So I think, you know, one of the things I can't, like Mr. Friedman, claim to have been part of the discussions 25 years ago, but we certainly study them. Thankfully, we certainly study them and certainly look at those outcomes. And the reality was that some difficult decisions were made, difficult trade-offs were made, and the fiscal space that freed up for us allowed us to do other things. So the question around how would a young man from Tembisa who has energy and maybe little else to offer get a foothold in the formal economy is that he would require some assistance. And who would provide that assistance? Well, ideally government, either through a training opportunity or some sort of grant plus assistance, either plugging into an existing business value chain, a learnership, something like that. But a broke fiscus can't do that. So I think they also, you know, I don't think that anyone sits and says inclusion is not important and only business priorities and imperatives should make their way into national discourse. Of course not. We can't grow on a sustainable high trajectory if we maintain the fractures that exist in the South African economy today. That much is true. But I think it is not fair to kind of say that this has not been government's focus all along. We know that the South African economy is highly concentrated. The Competition Commission, amongst others, has been doing lots of work to break down these cartels and monopolies, to free up space, to lower barriers to entry. That was a big part of the focus of our work. But ultimately, one still, as an individual entrepreneur, need your roads to be working. You need electricity. You need lower data costs. So I would be hesitant to position this as being two kind of dichotomous plans as opposed to one holistic thing. You need the fundamentals in place before you can start to do anything else. And in my own view, certainly before you can start to experiment, because experiments can go wrong. And at this point, we can't afford to lose any money.
So you're saying that we need the fundamentals to be in place before we can do anything else. And one of those key fundamentals is fiscal sustainability. That if we don't have fiscal sustainability, really the game is over almost is what you're saying. We won't be able to make progress on these other things that we wish to do.
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's kind of very easy for me. If you look at the basket of countries that we want to emulate and the basket of countries that we absolutely do not want to emulate, those that we want to emulate have their fiscal house in order. They have the fundamentals in order. They have the conditions that would allow a young man from Tembisa to go out and either find work or start work. Something simple like an efficient public transport system. that overcomes the spatial legacy that we have. Something simple, like being able to leave high school with the qualification that actually gets you in the door somewhere. So for me, without the fundamentals in place, kind of not really going anywhere. And in the short term, maybe that does mean some unhelpful or unpalatable trade-offs that say that for the next 2 to 3 years, some of these big structural limitations in terms of the labor market and inclusion do remain. But that doesn't, in my own mind, mean that it doesn't remain a massive priority for all of us.
So I saw in the conversation there was a debate between Ihsan Basia and Rob Davis, where Ihsan was saying that, Rob Davies was saying that the big attraction of enabling conditions is that they're costless from a fiscal point of view. You get private investment without having to spend any money by relaxing regulation. But Ihsan is countering and saying, well, but there are costs. They may not be borne by the fiscus, but they may be borne by society of removing regulatory constraints and allowing business more freedom to do what it wants, may then impose costs on society. What do you think about that discussion?
So I think it depends what they are. Certainly in terms of the ERRP, I can't think of any that fall in that basket. It's not clear to me how speeding up mining license allocations would impose a cost on society that cannot be borne. So really in terms of the selection of them, we were drawn to those that have a big economic impact and little to no fiscal impact. Certainly there may be some, I think particularly when you start to dig into labor market issues and protections, but I don't think that was the big focus of the regulatory barriers that we were talking about here. We're largely talking about things that free up economic activity rather than things that have this kind of potentially negative social spillover.
Thanks, Nombuyo. Boitumelo, I see in the conversation here, people are asking you exceedingly technical questions. I don't know if you have because we have one question that asks, have you comprehensively defined civic intentionality with regards to diversity transformation? I don't know if you have an answer to that. And another person has asked about the discount rate. So you might want to touch on those things. But when we talk about public infrastructure, isn't this actually inimical to inclusion? Because usually when we think about public infrastructure as the kind of the thing that is going to ignite economic development, we tend to discuss mega projects. So what is the big new power station or the huge road, or between Durban and Cape Town, the N2 bypass, or some big rail infrastructure intensive, or a huge dam that is going to displace a whole lot of people? Isn't infrastructure, shouldn't we rather, I mean, and in your introduction, you spoke about how the budget is shifting from consumption to infrastructure. But what if I put it to you to emulate some lawyer somewhere? What if I put it to you that actually, if we want inclusion, we should be spending more money on education and healthcare, in other words, consumption, rather than on mega projects and dams and stadiums and this kind of thing?
Yeah. Thanks, Michael. I just wanted maybe to first talk about, try and give some inputs on the, the question that you had initially raised. And for me, the issue of growth versus transformation. I think we need to acknowledge that in South Africa, we are no longer talking about how do we slice the pie differently. It's about how do we grow the pie for everyone, okay? And one of the things that certainly to me are very clear is the fact that jobless growth simply perpetuates the, the market structures that we have, which leave a huge chunk of, society outside of the formal economy. And this is why we see tension. Sometimes in the media, they call it between the capitalists and I suppose the socialist. So in many ways, I mean, government, when it's thinking about growth, it is considering the issue of inclusive growth. It is thinking about issues of resilience. It is also thinking about the issues of sustainability. And these, words, call them, for lack of a better word, these words, to me, they do describe how government is thinking about its growth, intentions. And maybe the other thing is to understand that there are vested interests. I mean, if someone is to come in and take up your market share, of course, you'll do everything in your power to try and increase the barriers to entry. So between the people that are already included in the system and those who may want to come in, of course, there's always going to be some kind of a tension. But the point is the role of government then becomes important to say, how do we create an enabling environment where the small guy can still find a way of coming in without necessarily for us forcing the big guy and say, well, you have to leave the market, or you have to, give up a portion of your market share by force. So for me, in many ways, it's about how to grow this pie for everyone who is involved in the economy. And the other thing is, it's also not fair to leave issues of economic growth or development to government. There's only so much that you can do as a government. There's so much that also has to be done by all the other agents of the economy. And I suppose when we talk about government plans, government policies, it's really about how to create that environment wherein everybody can come in. Now, when it comes to the issue of infrastructure, why I like this space is because, again, if you think about it, infrastructure is one of the tools or one of the instruments through which we can reduce, the exclusivity that we sometimes see. And there's a good example that we have seen in public transport systems, for example, where it was found, and this was an international study, where it was found that when we look at which proposals to support, we generally use the technical definition of what efficiency is, meaning that it has to be on cost, it has to be on budget, it also has to be according to specifications. But studies were finding that most of the users, and in this case it was women, so we assumed that everybody was the same. So there was homogeneity in how we were thinking about these issues. And what some countries have started to do is to ask, how do we explicitly cater for some of the requirements that may be specific to women, right? And they started to see, and this one I think was in Canada, they started to see that a lot more women were comfortable using the system. They felt safer, and so on and so forth. So, that's one of the instruments that you can use for driving inclusivity. Now, the other thing is, when we think about infrastructure, certainly in the space that I'm involved in, if a project is less than $1 billion, I can't even look at it. And I suppose it's because we've got major issues in this country related to infrastructure. So if we were to take the limited capacity that we have and spread it over the 10,000 projects that we have, it would simply not be impactful. But when we talk about public investments, we're actually not just talking about mega projects. Yes, sometimes we tend to talk about these big projects because that's where you get scale, that's where you get developmental impacts, bigger developmental impacts and so on and so forth. But in general, when we talk about public investment, it is inclusive of the small and the big. And I think if you look at the national infrastructure, the draft National Infrastructure Plan 2045, which was published about 2 weeks ago, you'll see that there we talk about economic infrastructure, but we also talk about social infrastructure. Now, to your question, Michael, specifically around it's better to be, investing more in education than it is to, infrastructure, for example. And in theory, I would say that, especially in South Africa, it's not a matter of where is it that we need to be spending, because we need to be doing all these things, right? Then it simply becomes an issue of trade-off, saying, where is it that we get the biggest bang for our buck? In infrastructure, we generally talk about, we are less concerned with spending. We are more concerned with creating value. In other words, we are not just in the space of digging up a hole. It's the usual example that we use, and then closing up that hole. We have spent money. We have created temporary jobs and so on and so forth. But in reality, we have not necessarily created any asset that will benefit generations to come. So we are more interested in creating value, or in creating assets, rather than creating liabilities or creating temporary spin-offs where in the future nobody actually benefits from some of these things. And what we also do is we compare.
Let me stop you there, Boitumelo. I see Imran. He wants to ask you a question, so I want to allow that, because that's a very democratic approach. Imran, what are your thoughts on this? Of course, as you're asking Boitumelo the question, you might also want to ponder also what Isan posed to you, that we can all agree with inclusive growth and employment, but what is it? What needs to be done? What is the priority, and what should we sacrifice in order to achieve that? But go ahead and let's engage with.
So let me deal with kind of Isan's kind of question first, and then I'll kind of put the question to Boitumelo. For me, the growth process has to be one that would kind of create new kind of economic opportunities for people to enter the market. The best practical example that I can think of is, if I'm in any other country in the world, I see a large number of people kind of producing products such as bread. Bread is the best example. You find hundreds of bakeries that locals go and buy their bread from. In the South African setting, you can go to the most kind of remote and rural part of the country, and you're going to be buying bread from one of the 3 or 4 big kind of producers. So I think some of the work that the Competition Commission has done on kind of issues such as the motor vehicle sector, food, etc., I think those are kind of absolutely kind of critical. I sort of also want to kind of respond to Nomvuyo's point about so I don't subscribe to the view that National Treasury is a sort of bunch of neoliberals, but I do think that National Treasury is not imaginative enough, and I think Nomvuyo's example, maybe I'm manipulating her words, but I don't want National Treasury to be a bank. The function of the National Treasury is not to be. I want my bank to be conservative and to manage my money well. I expect that from kind of Treasury too, but I kind of also expect a kind of imaginative growth plan to come out of Treasury. And I think my kind of critique of the plan would be that it's not imaginative enough in thinking about policies that would kind of bring in new kind of entrance into the economy. So to change tack, my kind of question to Boitumelo, I agree fully that we need a bold kind of investment plan. I think in some ways we make a false dichotomy between consumption and kind of investment. Much of kind of social expenditure is kind of investments in kind of in our infrastructure. So I think we need to be a bit more nuanced there. But my concern with the kind of infrastructure dimensions of it, and I think these are difficult questions that we need to answer. So the three kind of questions to Boitumelo are, firstly, can you convince me that our state has the capability to be able to kind of deliver on a kind of investment plan, and what are your thoughts on that? Secondly, can you convince me that a large fund of this sort is not going to be eaten by a bunch of vested interest in both the business and the political sphere? And I think it's important for us to remember that all of the stadia that we built during the World Cup were at least 30% above what we should have paid, and the vested interests, they were in the private sector. And thirdly, can you convince me that we have the security to be able to maintain that kind of infrastructure, so we get the payoff that you get from these public infrastructure kind of programs? You just have to look at the destruction of the kind of infrastructure in much of the rail system that was there, that is not there any longer. I think these questions that are maybe a bit more in the politics sphere, I think we need some kind of answers kind of on them, and we can't avoid having to deal with them. I'll stop there, Michael.
I have to invite Boitumelo to respond. You obviously, these are very deep questions. You don't have to respond to all of them, but tell us what your thought is, and then I'm going to come to Stephen.
Yeah. Thanks, Prof, for those thought-provoking questions. And I think you are alluding to some of the challenges that we are seeing in the infrastructure space. And maybe the first point to make is that, of course, accelerating infrastructure delivery is not an easy task. If it was, we would have done it already. One, you need the capability within the state to plan, to develop, and package proposals in a manner that over time develop a credible pipeline that of proposals that are investment ready or bankable. If you follow some of the discussions that have been happening in the SITS space, that Sustainable Infrastructure Development Symposium, which is when the president goes out and raises the 1 trillion or whatever amount that the government would want to come in specifically into the infrastructure space. They usually say that, where is your pipeline, right? And what we would generally do is publish a list of projects and programs that we think should be undertaken. And what we then find is that most of those proposals are not investment ready. It's not that they're not good investments. It's simply because we have not done sufficient work that demonstrates their value and so on and so forth. So, that capability within the state is quite important. And this is why, over 2 years ago, there was a huge drive in government to say, how do we put a spotlight on project preparation activities? And I know that some funding was allocated to some state institutions just so that they can start developing best practice in as far as project preparation activities are concerned. However, we are yet to fully realize some of the benefits from the money that we've invested in these things. So to cut a long story short, I cannot convince you that the government has the capability to deliver on this huge investment plan. The reality is that we are building that capability. And I think attached to that is the whole issue of exploring various ways of financing infrastructure. I just want to link this to the infrastructure fund, for example, where in the past we seem to have had some kind of a dichotomy where it's either a project is seen as being social or commercial, right? So social projects will be funded by the fiscus, and commercial projects, of course, will be supported through the user pay principle. But what we were beginning to find is that you do have blended projects, meaning that a project that is commercial in nature, but it also has a social component. And a good example of this is, dam. When you have a dam, there's a component that can supply agriculture, can supply mines, and so on and so forth. But you also have a social component that is responsible for supplying your indigent household with that water. So what we tried to do, at least with the infrastructure fund, was to create a vehicle through which blended finance solutions could be explored by government. And another reason was because we were also seeing that the fiscus was quite constrained, and we also needed to think differently around funding infrastructure. So if you look at the student housing program, again, we had to come up with some kind of mechanisms. Procurement, the way in which we procure infrastructure is not necessarily the most efficient, and our processes are protracted. So we talk about the PPP review that we are doing. Again, this is about delivering public infrastructure plan, but using the private sector, because we are trying firstly to buy expertise, because we have acknowledged that we don't have sufficient expertise. Of course, what we are trying to build is the oversight capacity, because that we still need to do internally. And then we are also trying to buy a little bit of money, and that's the PPP regulation. But also even in the way that we implement infrastructure, if we talk about opportunities for corruption, leakage that we see in the system, whether you talk in terms of inefficiencies or wastage, it's one of the things that we are also looking at. So to cut a very long story short, it is an issue that there are a lot of things that are so not right in the infrastructure space, and all these bits and pieces are moving at the same time. And it is my hope that at some point we will have these things corrected. It will take a bit of time. It will take a lot of political will and expertise within the public sector. Of course, we can't hire now, but anyway, those are issues that are besides the point. Now, I want to deal with the maintenance issue. One of the things that we started to do, and thanks to Michael, is a reform that we call a budget facility for infrastructure. And one of the things that it aims to do is to deal with the life cycle costing of infrastructure proposals. So we noticed within the system that there was a bias for building new, and we can understand why it's it's better to be cutting a ribbon than for some asset in the middle of nowhere, which just wants to maintain functionality. So I suppose maybe the incentives for some of the agents were more in the cutting of ribbons. So through that process, we say that tell us how much is it going to cost to put the infrastructure in place? How much is it going to take to operate it? How much is it going to take to maintain it throughout its life spend, meaning that if you are building a power station, we are saying, tell us, what's your plan around operations and maintenance over the next 60 years, right? And we are trying to, we introduce these things because we were trying to reduce the bias from building new instead of maintaining. And we even went further in terms of some of the grants that we have within the fiscus. They say, conditional grants would say that you cannot build new unless you have proven that you have maintained the old. However, the problems of government are many, and I will not necessarily delve into them. All I can say is that this is still an aspiration from a government perspective, and this is where I would like to leave it there, Michael.
Thank you very much, Boitumelo. I saw there's the chat, but there's also a Q&A in which Professor Friedman, a question is posed to you. Let me just find it here, and I should apologize for this, but Kwena Mabie says, Professor Friedman, what would steering away from textbook solutions look like? How do we create a better intersection with the reality on the ground? How do we make theory fit better with our lived stories? And I want to invite you to take that away. I also wanted to invite you to comment on the role of National Treasury, because I don't know, I always say, one of the roles of National Treasury is to be the whipping boy, to be blamed for things that maybe can't be done. I remember once being in a meeting with the former Minister of Land and Agriculture, Gugile Nkwinti, and he said in relation to the ANC that the problem we have here is that the ANC takes a resolution that 2 + 2 must equal 5. And then Treasury comes and tells them that, no, actually 2 + 2 equals 4. And then they're told, well, that's because you're a neoliberal. Would you agree with that that is the fundamental problem here? Or I know you've written in the past, Professor Friedman, a lot about National Treasury and its role. And I wonder if you can reflect on that a little bit, both in the past and in the current situation.
Well, thanks very much, Michael, for pointing out that I have written quite a lot about National Treasury. And I think if Nomvweo consults what I've written about National Treasury, she will not find in any of the articles I've written any suggestion that Treasury is neoliberal. It's never been my position. And I find it interesting that she responds to my position by caricaturing it. First of all, by claiming that I regard National Treasury as a bunch of neoliberals, which is clearly false. And secondly, by giving me a sort of very South African economics 1 lesson, because we never seem in our debates to go beyond economics 1 about how we can't spend money unless we have it. Not once in anything I said about inclusion did I suggest that we should spend money on anything. I didn't make any spending proposals at all. You were the one who made spending proposals, because your response to the young man in Tembisa is that we should give him a check and a bus ticket. And the check and the bus ticket are not going to work because the check's going to run out and the bus ticket's going to take him to a place where there are no jobs, because that is the reality. And not only do we have no jobs at the moment, but under any conceivable growth path, we are not going to have the formal sector jobs we need for the next 5 generations. So I think that's the kind of thing that we ought to take into account. And it's not, it's not only that, a particular senior official in Treasury wants to respond to criticism in that way. It's the way the South African debate operates. And it starts to get to Mr. Mabe's excellent question. But before I get to his excellent question, let me say that I think Treasury is very often used as a scapegoat for things which are not Treasury's fault. I think there are a lot of caricatures about Treasury, and as you pointed out, I've written about those caricatures. I happen to think that at the moment, looking at the documents, looking at observed behavior, Treasury has made a particular strategic choice at the moment, which I think is very ill-conceived. and which I think needs to be criticized. That doesn't mean that Treasury is an institution is not important.
How would you characterize that strategic choice that you say Treasury has made? What are you referring to?
I think that Treasury has put, as I said earlier, and I'm basing this on my reading of the current documents and on what I see happening in the environment. I think that it has put its eggs in the private sector investment basket. And yes, of course, we need private sector investment, but that is not the only mechanism which we need to be looking at. So I don't have problems about independent power producers. I don't have problems about the path that SAA has taken, but it's only a part of the story. And the other part of the story is not being addressed. And that takes me on to the excellent question. How do we start concretizing this? How do we start looking at this in real terms? Now, I'm afraid the argument on one level is abstract and economic, because we have these non-debates, not simply because we haven't read the right books, because everybody has read the right books, but because we are stuck in a particular way of viewing the world, which needs to change if we're going to become aware of the social and economic realities in our own country. And to summarize, and I'm sorry, this sounds like an ad, but it is in the book, all in the book I've just published. But to summarize a more complicated process, I think what we've been doing for 27 years is trying to implement an agreement between the old economic elite and the new political elite that what a good South Africa would look like is what white people enjoyed in the 1960s under apartheid for everybody. And there are all sorts of reasons why that came about. But it creates an absurd debate. And let me concretize that in one example. We have this debate in South Africa, in very inverted commas, in which various social actors and political parties present proposals for creating 8 million jobs or 12 million jobs or whatever million jobs you choose to come around. And sorry, they are all fantasy. None of them have any prospect of being realized ever, because you don't need me to tell you that the entire way in which people are looking at jobs around the world has changed. I have colleagues, and I think they're right, who say we need to talk a lot less about jobs and a lot more about livelihoods, because the livelihood is a much more expansive concept than job. And we're not having that conversation because under apartheid in the 1960s, every white person got up in the morning who was not totally irredeemable and drunk and went to work in a shop or an office or a factory. And I'm afraid
some of those ones also went to work. The ones
yes,
who were
this is fair comment. Yes, obviously true. And the point is that you cannot build a viable South Africa on trying to create for everybody what 10% of the population stole for themselves by using guns and bombs and police. It just can't be done. So we have to start looking at things differently. And let me give you another concrete example. Okay. I had a conversation a few years ago with some American visitors who'd just been to Khayelitsha. And they said, sorry, we're a bit confused. And I said, what are you confused about? They said, we keep on hearing that there's no entrepreneurship in South Africa. But we've just been to Khayelitsha and the place is full of entrepreneurship. There are all sorts of people doing entrepreneurial things. And I said, yes, what you need to understand is that what they're doing in Khayelitsha embarrasses the policymakers. Because as far as the policymakers is concerned, they should be doing what they're doing on the streets of Khayelitsha. They should be doing in a glass and concrete office block. And if they're not doing it in the glass and concrete office block, then they are a dependency problem. And they need to be somehow shoehorned into a formal economy in which there is no room for them. And that's the kind of thinking we have to change. We have to start seeing people who engage in economic activity in township street corners as major assets who need to be supported and who need to be encouraged and who need to be provided with the wherewithal they need. And money is a very small part of it. I mean, money in the sense of money in their pockets. And until we start doing that, we have these non-debates in which the one side says, well, you need money in order to do things, and the other side says, well, let's nationalize the mines and the banks, none of which are particularly useful responses to the particular situation in which we find ourselves.
Thank you, Prof. I'm going to invite Nomvuyo just now, but I wanted to just, I hope you can all see this, that I've put up this poll, and I hope you're all able to contribute to the poll, which says, which element of the reconstruction and recovery plan should be that, it should say the absolute priority, not the absolution priority. It should say, which is the priority here? That's the question. Infrastructure, energy supply, public employment, industrialization through localization, enabling conditions, or none of the above, which is also an apt response. I wanted to say, I think, one of the things that Professor Friedman enlightened, which I found very enlightening about the role of National Treasury, was that unlike, in a sense, the reason that one of the reasons National Treasury, I think, is criticized a lot is because it is a center, or it has historically been, and I think it still is, a center of excellence within government. But the argument put forward by Professor Friedman long ago was that there's a reason for that. And that is that there is a very direct mechanism of accountability. Because Treasury is that, almost all government departments are responsible for spending money. But Treasury is the only one that is responsible for mobilizing the revenue. And that revenue is mobilized from two sources, essentially. The one is from taxpayers, and the other is from bond markets. And as soon as the Minister of Finance says something that riles taxpayers or riles bond markets, there's an immediate response, which is felt in the value of the rand and the yield curve and such things. So there's a direct line of accountability from somebody to National Treasury, which keeps it on its toes. But other departments, so when the Department of Social Development says we must nationalize the private savings industry, there isn't such a, well, maybe Treasury feels the response. The Department of Social Development wouldn't feel that response, and so continues on to say these things. So I wanted to just say that as a segue into Nomvuyo, to say I hope let's not get too trapped. Treasury official, your job is to be criticized, and you're doing a very good job at it. So Nomvuyo, what do you say in response to any of the preceding conversation?
Well, thank you, Michael, for that intro. Yes, we don't. It is part of the contract that you sign when you join Treasury that you accept you won't be liked. It's part of the occupational hazard. I mean, I was a little bit surprised because it started, Prof. Friedman started almost like he was disagreeing with me. But then we ended up on the same page by saying entrepreneurs need to be supported. And he was arguing that money is a small part of it. I certainly wasn't suggesting large spending programs. What I was saying is that government supports economic activity, and government's actions can either help or hinder. So what a good functioning economy in which everyone can participate needs are the basics. Government needs to be able to pay its bills. We need to have functioning streetlights. We need to have functioning roads. We need to have electricity. We need to have connectivity. And all of those are things that government needs to either provide or facilitate for any kind of economic activity to occur. And yes, that does cost money. Maybe not huge amounts of money, certainly maybe not the amounts we've been spending. But this idea that, I mean, I don't know, I'd be very open to hearing how one would actually start or thrive or continue any kind of economic activity in the absence of the public goods that government is supposed to provide. I think that would take us off into a whole new economic paradigm, actually, and could be a very interesting conversation. But I note that the session is winding down, and I just wanted to end by thanking the panelists for this very engaging and interesting conversation.
Thank you very much, Nomvuyo. As you have noticed, we're left with about 2 minutes before the end of the session. And I'm very disappointed because only 32 people have voted in the poll. So it means that there's about 70 people in the audience who or maybe those are the you know, what a great man once said, better fewer but better. Maybe the 70 who haven't voted, their opinions, they don't really have the opinion. So we'll rely on the 30%. But before we close, let me ask Imran to just try and take us towards closure, respond to a few issues, and if you can, help me. You know, I've been helped here by people in the conversation, in the question and answer session. They've helped me do this job, and maybe you can help me close this session. Imran.
So I was wanting to kind of quickly respond to Steve, and then we can probably fight after the session. But I think Stephen is both right and kind of wrong. I think that policy makers and a set of vested interests are not seeing enough of the possibilities that we have in the informal of the possibilities that we have in a part of the economy that we call the informal kind of economy. And it's kind of interesting when you have these debates with policy makers about the issue. The policy response is to try to formalize the informal, and for me that seems to be the wrong way to think about it. Where I disagree with Steve and is I think this kind of economy does deliver too few jobs for the level for the level of the economy, and I think we have to look at the wage structure and think about some kind of important questions about the vested interests there that stop employment growth, and I think that's an important issue. Just to close, my own sense is this dichotomy that we put up about the National Treasury having to be the ones that take the criticism, I think is maybe a false place that you're painting yourselves in. The kind of reality is that you should be kind of leading a kind of economic growth plan that I think is a truly ambitious one, and I think the time is right to do that, and not take the defensive positions that you take.
Thank you very much. I'm not going to try and summarize everything, but I just you know, have been avoiding making my own to some extent contributions on these debates. But I think the debate about jobs and the way Stephen and Nomvuyo and to an extent Boitumelo have talked about the person in Tembisa, and Imran has also talked about the importance of jobs. I think there's a fundamental rethinking. You know, we usually think in terms of the state versus the market, and that overlaps with the public versus the private, and that overlaps with progressive politics versus kind of reactionary politics. And I think we have to find a way of overcoming these dichotomies, because as Professor Friedman said earlier, there is a strong sense, and I don't think it's a Treasury problem, it's across the whole of government, that you give a person a house and then you instruct them that they are not allowed to sell the house. and for 8 years. Or we don't seem to see people's autonomous attempts to make livelihoods for themselves as legitimate. And we have to find a way and as Stephen Friedman says, we want to make it, we think formal business is the only business worth promoting. And we have to, I think, find a way of opening up to a different type of economy, because in my view, even if we have a robust growth of the economy in the next 3 to 5 years, we are still going to be left in this society with mass unemployment, mass poverty and inequality, and we need to begin finding paths towards transforming the underlying reality. So that's not really a conclusion, but it's an attempt at one. And I would want to thank all of you for participating in what I think has been a lively discussion. In case you were wondering, the results of our poll is that most of the conscious elements in this audience, the unconscious elements didn't vote, but most of the conscious elements, or a plurality of the conscious elements, felt like enabling conditions is the issue we need to focus on, followed very closely by infrastructure. So there you have it, and maybe this says more about who you are than what the right answer is. So thank you very much, and let me hand back to the conference organizers. I'm not sure what's if I'm supposed to press a button, or I can maybe play the guitar a little bit for you or something like that.
Don't we just all leave?
I think we all just leave. So goodbye to all of you.
All right. Cheers, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Bye.
Not sure how to leave.
It's my